Hi everyone, thanks for coming to this week's weekly live stream on Concept Cookie. Just going to go ahead and do our quick posting all around on our social markets, and then we will go ahead and get started. And as always, we do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m., and that is Central Time in America. And outside of the States, it is -5 GMT. And usually I'll post what subject matter we'll be working on like an hour, sometimes 2 hours beforehand. All right, there we go. All right, so official, here's the start. Thanks, guys, for coming to this Concept Cookie Wednesday live stream. Like I said earlier, we do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m. And today I'm going to be working on the final part of our May character, which is Grizzy. And every week I've been updating her slowly and slowly. And today we're going to be focusing on like the finer details and polishing. So I'm going to take a look at the skin and her eye, as well as the jewelry around her neck, and then some of the material that's around her chest area. So hopefully this will give you guys a better idea of how I go about rendering, and maybe you'll pick up some tips and tricks on how to do some stuff as your own. And I also have Deandra with us, so any questions that you may have, we'll have the questions open on the side. You can go ahead and ask them, and we will get back to you. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here. So here we go. This is what we've kind of led to as of now. And I'm going to go ahead and hide those what we're going to work on today. So the first thing I think I want to work on is, kind of want to start with the eye. So I'm going to make a new layer, and I'll be announcing what we're doing each step so you guys kind of can follow along for the stuff that you can't see. And I'm using a chalk brush right now. And you know what, actually I'm going to change it to the basic circle hard edge brush. And pretty much this is just going to be used to define and kind of finish off the eye section here. So as I start off, I'm going to focus on kind of bringing all the attention to this area here. So I want everything to kind of be less defined around the edges, and then more defined as we get closer to the eye. So I'm going to darken that iris a bit. And I try not to have as harsh of a line surrounding the iris as much as I used to. And the pupil even, I try not to have like just be a solid black circle. I think it actually has a better feel to it when it has more of a light, not gradient, but maybe even just a slight fade between the two. And to really emphasize the age of her skin, I try to have it sag over the eye a bit more than I typically would. And now for the shadows, what most artists do that I do not recommend is they tend to just make it darker just for the sake of it's a shadow, it should be darker. But I forgot which artist it was that really emphasized it, but they talked about how shadows don't add value, and I like to try to use different colors to represent the shadow, and usually I'll stick to colors that kind of gravitate towards grays or more neutrals to showcase the shadows. Now, that's not to say that they won't still be a darker value shade, because usually you still want to give that value difference between the light and the shadow areas, but the colors you choose are also just as important. So now, in areas like here where we have this nice defined line, I'm going to try to edit it just a tad to age it. So right now it's so tight that we want it to actually look older, because if it is a really tight crease with the skin fold, it might look more youthful. But for her, we're going for a more aged look. And this is another one of those times where reference would really help out. So I definitely have some reference on my other monitor here pulled up. And like we talked about in the last live stream, you can use reference, but don't just steal and copy from it. You want to analyze it and work it into your piece. And the eye itself seems to be casted in shadow quite a bit. So I'm going to try to separate the skin folds from the eyelid, especially on like the inside area. This was something that I remember my high school teacher really dug into me for, is make sure that you include it's not a flap, but the part of the skin that is attached pretty much to the eye. And there's a little separation fold from that skin to where the eyelashes begin. So you want to make sure that you keep that in mind as you draw the eye.
Like a ridge almost?
Yeah, that's a better way to describe it. So now in this pocket, you can kind of see how we just went to a dark brown. And that was just kind of a cop-out because when I'm zoomed out, I'm just trying to create the essence of value. But we're going to go ahead and get in there and kind of clean it up and define this area. Because oftentimes I find it easy to hide things in shadows and just to make them dark. And especially more recently, I've been trying to avoid that and stop me from doing that, because I feel like it's an easy trick to hide areas that you're not comfortable with, or that you're not feeling so much, or you're lazy, I guess. And in essence, I can get lazy with some of my paintings where I'm like, oh, I just want to be finished with this area. So then I'll tend to either just do like a multiply layer and make it darker or something like that. But do your best to really focus and finish it to the best of your ability all the way through. And you won't regret it if you do that. So I'm going to use my overlay layer, and I'm just going to give it a slightly more warmed hue right in the corner. And usually, like I mention a lot, when I use an overlay or multiply layer, I like to lay it on a little heavier and then change the layer's opacity down. So you can see the effect that that really gives it. It gives it that boost of color. And it actually makes the skin look more lifeless before we added it. So if I turn that layer on and off, you can see what an overlay layer can do. Oh, Dee, what are the questions coming in?
Well, the first one is, do you have any tips for portraits to get the features right? Like using a raster or...
Any tips for portraits to get the features right?
It's kind of a big overall question.
Yeah, I would say definitely reference helps out a lot more than you might think. And it's not cheating. I feel like the artists that feel like using reference is cheating, they're only hurting themselves in the long run. And that doesn't mean that you have to pull in a picture and draw over it. But if you have it on the side and maybe have like a couple different references that you're looking at, just really look at the way, like how far away is the nose from the eye, and really look at the shapes in between the two facial features and try to define them as best you can. And over time, you'll just become better just through practice and muscle memory, really, on the correct proportions and where to place stuff. So I would say keep practicing, use reference, and um, I guess those would be the big two ones. And I don't know, DeAndre, do you have any tips for that kind of stuff?
Um, basically what you just said already. Um, but the latter half of his like question was if you like use a raster or not.
Use a what?
A raster, like versus a vector. Not quite sure how to answer that.
Um, I mean, I use raster. I've never done a vector-based profile before.
But besides that, really just learning your subject matter well, getting them practicing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely agree that that's the most important.
Another question is, how do you determine like what colors to use for the whites of the eyes?
Definitely don't
Besides,
use white.
yeah. Sorry.
Um, there you go.
Hmm?
Did you want to say something about that?
Oh. No, just saying. Um, well, I guess it depends on like I would typically use like a maybe gray or like a brownish gray or something.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I like have a set color in mind. Like I don't have a color in my palette that I'm like that's my go-to for the white part of the eye or the cornea. I will say that I usually pull colors from the surrounding face because usually I'll light the face in either a warm or cool color, and I like to have that color kind of reflected and represented in the eye as well.
Yeah.
I definitely tend to make it more muted. So if the skin is like more of this lighter tan color, you can see as I color pick the eye, it's more of a gray and slightly higher in value. So that's the other thing I want people to see. I don't know if you can even see this when I pull up my color picker, but when I uh, do my eyedropper on the inside of the eye, it's actually almost halfway between white and black on the value scale, and it has a little hue to it in saturation, but it's important to note that it's pretty far away from white as an
Yeah.
individual color. And the only time I like to use white would be like for this area of the eye where it's reflecting a shine. And
Mm-hmm.
even that, I try not to use pure whites. I try to get it close to white,
Yeah.
but I would say, yeah, that would be my advice for definitely don't use white for the eye.
Yeah. I think typically you want to stay away from like white and black in like in any part of your drawing for the most part.
Hmm.
Always use like an off white or not quite black.
And whites should almost be reserved for highlights. Well, not even a pure white. Like what Deandra's saying, an off-white would be best. But when you add white to something, it definitely gives it that shiny texture appearance. So the surface of whatever that would be. So like I know some people even use it on skin, but as soon as you add it to skin, it can either start to look wet or even worse, it may start to look like it's plastic. And you want to avoid doing that as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So as I zoom out, you can see the just minor difference that that makes. And I'm going to get rid of that second shine that's on the eye. It's actually really distracting for me. And something like this, I could spend hours rendering, and especially since this is something I'm unfamiliar with, I want to take my time with learning the different wrinkles and the folds and the way that the skin works. But for time's sake, I think soon I'm going to move on to the jewelry aspect of it, and I'll show you guys how to do a quick kind of ruby necklace that she's going to be wearing around her neck. So here I'm just kind of defining the nose a bit more, because before it looked a little too muddy. Even though I do want the focus to be more on the eyes, that doesn't mean I need to leave the other areas so left untreated that it actually becomes distracting how unfinished it is. And for those of you who are here, we definitely have a nice little surprise at the end of this live stream. It's something that we've been working on for the past few months. So it's kind of good that we can finally announce what it is to you guys after the stream is over. And so probably around 3 p.m. our time. So in about a little over 30 minutes, we'll kind of tell you what we guys are going to announce. Alright, I'm going to leave the face alone for now, because I could spend like I said, I could spend so much more time rendering it and trying to make it look as best as possible. I'll put all those layers that we just created in a group, so you can just see the minor difference we made in pulling the focus closer to the eye. So not much, but it definitely gives it more color, and I would probably keep refining the other eye a little bit. The other eye is a little muddy to me. But for now, let's move on to the jewelry. And this is one of those really quick tips that you can do on your own pieces that if you want to add a quick thing of any kind of jewelry, really, it doesn't even have to be a ruby. It could be anything that has a clear surface and texture to it. So I'm just going to go ahead and cover these up with the skin color here, and I'll take you through. I'm going to create this really quick. Okay, so I'm going to make a new layer. Now for her, I want to do a ruby. I think the red really will match her personality, and if I have it kind of surrounded by like a silver ornamented, I don't know what it's called when it surrounds the jewel, but I think that's kind of the look that I would be going for. So I'm going to lay out where the necklace would lay on her chest. Then it would probably have some fancy design around it. And the design itself doesn't have to be anything in particular. Even for this, what we're doing, I'm not going to be rendering it out. And that's just something you just spend your time on and really make sure it looks nice. But for now, I'm just going to kind of leave it implied where you can kind of guess and tell what the different areas would be, but I'm going to focus on the actual jewel of the necklace. Alright, so on a new layer, I'm going to first choose a really dark red. So the color I'm going to be using will be, actually that's more of a purple. You get it more to a red. This color here. So I'm going to lay it out, and it's just going to be a simple circular, or more of an oval, I guess, shape. So I'm going to lay that on. And then using a lighter red, I'm going to be painting more near the bottom of the jewel. And I'm going to have a slight gradient as it goes up. So the top of the jewel will actually be darker in color. And you'll see why we do that in a second. So now I'm going to grab an even lighter, more intense red, almost a super saturated red. And that will go even more on the bottom. Then you can paint it however you like. Sometimes I like to add some scratch marks, a bit more of a painterly brushed look to it. And now what will really bring it together is we're going to put in our highlight. So I'm going to be using a cooler highlight to really contrast the red. So I'm going to be using this color. Then taking the angle and the kind of direction of the light that we placed in initially, I'm going to place the highlight on the darker part of the gradient that we just created. And you'll see how that will start rounding it out pretty much instantly. And then maybe I'll give it a slight highlight on the edging of the jewel.
Hey Tim,
Yeah.
what resolution do you typically work at?
I typically like to work at a print resolution because sometimes I don't know if I'm going to be printing my works or not. So I would say minimum 8.5 by 11 at a 300 resolution. But that varies. I would say if I know it's going to be used for something larger, I'll work at an 11 by 17. But for the most part, I at least try to keep the resolution at 300. Now this is where I would probably get more into the detailing of the finer ornamental details around the gem, and I'll zoom in so you guys can see this a little more clear. I'm going to merge that layer down. And then using my eraser tool, I'm going to change the hardness to 100%. Then I could either do this with an eraser tool or with the selection tool. And I would just edge out that gem, give it that nice crisp edging. And then if we really wanted to take it to another level, I would have some of that red that would be shining through. So if the light direction is coming this way, it's going to be passing through the gem, giving it that subsurface scattering look, and that's why the red is so much more prominent on the bottom of the gem. And then some of it would be casted on kind of like a shadow, so it would be like a cast shadow of red. But I want to make sure it's not too prominent, or else that can become distracting. So I'm going to change the layer's opacity down. And from here, you can just kind of have fun with the detailing part. Now, like I said, for the highlights, I like to keep it more cool, especially when it's on a jewelry or something that appears to be like a silver, or usually most metals in general, I'll try to have cooler highlights. And I think that's just because it makes it pop out a bit more. And it gives it either a slight purple or a slight blue off tone, which I kind of like. And that is all just personal preference. So I mean, if you want to use warm lights on your jewelry, don't feel like you have to use cooler colors on your jewelry. So you can see how just little detailing like that from close up, even if it looks a bit messy from farther away or at the view that you're going to be actually looking at it, it might look actually pretty detailed from a distance. So don't feel like you have to get in and intricately detail parts of a image that are actually very small in contrast to the image as a whole. And then the areas in the shadow, I probably wouldn't add that much highlight to. There might be some bounce highlights, but for the most part, I'm going to leave it pretty dark. And that's because the light is being blocked by her head, because her head's casting a shadow on her neck. So I would add minimal amounts of highlights to the necklace underneath of her neck. But I would still add some just to give it that representation of a metal, because otherwise it would just look pretty flat. I would probably thin it off as it gets near the end. And if you're like me, so if you're a guy that doesn't really know what jewelry looks like, I need reference where I don't know like what does look good, like how many beads should I add before it just stops into the string part of the jewelry. And there's no shame in looking at reference. Just type it in Google and you'll find like thousands of references that you can use. So here I'm just making it a little more intricate, something more interesting to look at. You can see how, since that is so detailed compared to the surrounding area, I would probably have to either give it more of a blur look or somehow make the neck look more detailed, because right now it kind of stands out too much, which is actually a bad thing. But if I really wanted to flesh out this entire character, I would probably focus on, let me see here, I would focus on like this general area, and then as we get to the edges, it would be more blurry. So the necklace itself actually falls into the area I would probably keep detailing. So I wouldn't want to worry about that so much, because I would probably then end up detailing the neck more. Okay, now we're going to move on to, we have this fabric. Actually, you know what? I'm going to give that necklace, it's actually bothering me that it doesn't have any kind of highlights on it. So I'm just going to give it some value. But like I said, I'm going to keep it very subtle since it is in the shadow part of the shadow, since the head's casting that shadow. But I want to add something to give it at least the indication that it is metal and not just a black string. And maybe I would even make this upper gem, this upper section gem as well. But since the light's not hitting this one, it would definitely be more in shadow and you wouldn't get that highlight like we did on the bottom one. Yeah, I think I like the way that looks. Alright, so now let's work on the fabric here. So I'm going to make a new layer. So you can see the necklace layer is on its own layer. Now let's go ahead and start with the fabric. So even though I know that her fabric's going to be dirtied up just from wear and tear and years of use, I still want to add a pretty clean base or solid foundation for it to be on top of. Because oftentimes I muddle colors too much where then I end up having to fix it, and that's like my rendering. But if I start with a nice clean base, it's a lot easier for me to render out rather than trying to feel like I'm fixing something constantly. And that's just a different way of doing things. I know one of my friends really likes, or he calls it organizing chaos, where he'll lay down a crazy amount of work and then he takes the time to organize the chaos. And it's a method that works well, but for me, I feel like it is very a time-consuming method that doesn't work for things like this where I'm like on a time constraint. And even though I still have a half hour of the stream left, I want to make this fabric and material look as best I can in the shortest amount of time. So you can tell in the areas that are in shadow, I'm not multiplying the shadow area. I'm simply working with a slightly toned down value of that same color. And that's what I was trying to imply and you work with earlier is that shadows don't add value, they're just not receiving light. And I know that may sound kind of confusing, but when you think about it, they shouldn't be pure black everywhere that's a shadow. You want to work with them and really work with the colors that would be in the shadow area and treat them not like they're just dark because they're in shadow. Then some of this fabric would be casting a shadow on itself as well. So I want to be aware of that. I'm going to pull a lighter color just to separate the two fabrics from each other more. Because right now they're blending in so much where it's actually hard to tell where one ends and one begins.
Somebody suggested that you add a little bead at the end of the pendant, like hanging off.
Oh, hanging off of the big one?
Yeah.
I could do that.
That might be cool. And they also asked if you think it's possible to get like jobs as a traditional concept artist versus digital.
I'm going to say yes, but you have to be very good at what you do. And I know that there's still some artists out there that even work traditional first and then they'll bring it into a digital medium. But if you want to do traditional work, I mean, your stuff has to be really spot on. And it's kind of tough to say. Like, there are some animation studios that really cater to artists that work traditionally. Like, in a lot of art of books that I like to read, I see a lot of DreamWorks artists, and even Pixar, really, that have a lot of artists that start traditional, and they'll upload, like, their pastel drawings or their, the charcoal sketches that they've drawn of the characters. So I would say yes, you can still get a job as a traditional medium artist, but it definitely makes it easier if you know digital. And I think that's one reason why I would recommend learning digital if possible.
I definitely think there's a higher demand for digital, but it's not impossible to just stay traditional.
Mm-hmm.
So I know, like, I follow a few artists that work purely like traditionally, and they have jobs and they're like successful, but it's just harder. Like, you really have to know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Like I think of Cameron Davis. Like he was able to illustrate his whole book traditionally, but he would add small edits digitally.
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely say learn both, and if you're still comfortable working traditional, that's fine. But just know you can always enhance your traditional stuff a little bit in Photoshop as well. I'm almost treating this like a painting where I'm working with a smaller brush, and I'm really looking at, okay, how is this angle going to be affecting the way the fabric's folding? And I'm thinking about making sure it makes sense if we look at it as a whole. So I have to be consistent with the lighting as well.
And you were talking about the method of just like kind of laying down like a bunch of shapes and like as like instead of defining them right off the bat, just like laying them down. I
Mm-hmm.
think that works for like when you want to be when like maybe you don't have a clear idea right at the start. It's good to like just play around and like kind of use the shapes to like become like they become their own thing, and then like whatever you want to illustrate is just based off that. But if you have something in mind, I think that's just creating a hassle for yourself. So
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I would also say for fabrics, you want to make sure that you have a nice crisp edge, or else things might get muddled together. So even as I finish this up, I'll probably zoom in and try to make the edge of this fabric look as sharp as possible. And as always, working with white is a really tough color to work with. You don't have much hue contrast to play with. And I will in a second. I like to lay out a base foundation for me to work with on like, then I would take this to the next step and then maybe add a multiplier and overlay and really bring in some color values, because as of now, I'm mostly working as if it was like a grayscale image. And that'll work for now, but it definitely leaves room for interest where it looks pretty, I don't want to say boring, but it's not as interesting as like the red ruby, or your attention will just get brought back up to the face just because it has more detail and more colors that your eyes can look at. So when working with white, just be mindful that you want to make it as interesting as you can, even with a limited color like this.
how do you suggest doing that?
So after I finish kind of rendering out this one side, I'll add color and I'll show you guys kind of how I would go about making this more interesting. And sometimes you don't want to overdo it, or if you're adding a bunch of random colors to make the white more interesting, it actually can have the opposite effect where then it becomes very distracting. So I like to add just a subtle gradient of color. So let me first finish this off.
Do you have like go-to colors that you use for like white in particular? Or does it depend on like each piece?
It depends on each piece, but I would say I go to two main colors in question. So it'd be like a lighter blue / light purple, or like a light yellow. And it just depends on if I want it to be more warm or more cool.
Mm.
I definitely want some of the wrinkles around the edge of the fabric here. And like what I was saying earlier, is you definitely want that nice crisp edge to fabric, because otherwise it might look muddy. Unless if that's the impression you're kind of going for, where it's supposed to be more impressionist, then that's completely fine and that's a style. But if you're going for something that looks more realistic, definitely have a nice clean edge. Alright, so we have our base pretty much laid out, and you can tell that this side is definitely more rendered than this side, where it's more muddled on that side as of now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer. Let's first try an overlay. And sometimes I have to kind of play and test with it, because I don't always know if a particular way of doing something is going to work until I actually try it. So right where the sun light is kind of hitting the edge of this, I'm going to lay out this soft yellow. And since it's an overlay layer, what I like to always do, and I keep reiterating it, is I like to lay it on pretty thick and then lower the layer's opacity. So right here, I'm probably going to either work with a blue or a purple in the shadow area. Then I'm going to work that all the way down so that the shadow still retains some of that color adjustment that we're adding here. And the blue that I'm using, I'll put it on the side here. I'm going to change it so it's a little more neutral, is like this color here. So it actually comes off more as a violet than a blue, which is not what I'm going for. So let me change it more to blue. It's like this color here. There we go.
Somebody asked what your opinion is on like putting your artwork like online and on sites like having like a Facebook fan page. Like, how important do you think that is, or do you like it, or what?
Well, considering I have one, I definitely like it. I also use it as kind of like a photo album where I always know anything that I ever have done, it's in one spot. And I like the idea that I can always go to it and have it as a reference. And I think it's a good idea because I think artists are able to promote themselves more than just they normally would be able to with like their own website and even blog spots for the most part. Sometimes it's hard to gain a lot of attention or followers where Facebook's kind of like a go-to. So I personally like it, and I think that's hard for some artists to swallow, that you're marketing yourself as an artist and it becomes almost impersonal, but you can't think that way. You have to really concentrate of yourself and making it in this business, and to do that you really have to market yourself as a brand. And I know it sounds really ugly and people hate hearing this, but if you want to make it in this business, you're going to start to become a recognized name based on the work that you do and the way that you kind of market yourself out. So yes, I definitely think having a Facebook page is great. I think having a page on all the big websites like DeviantArt, what was CG Hub, Draw a Crowd, Art Society, whatever it may be, as long as you get your name out there, that's what you really want to focus on. Alright, so I've been adding color to this material, and it's very overwhelming. It's very harsh. So you can see as I turn the layers on and off, you can see how it's very intense. So I'm going to turn that layer's opacity down to about halfway. So you can see the subtle difference now that's giving, and even that might be a bit too much. So I'll turn the opacity to like 35. And that's about the look that I'm going for. Now, depending on if I wanted the eye's attention to be drawn here or not, I'd probably make it either more detailed or I would add more color contrast to it. Right now, the eye still kind of gravitates right to this gemstone because of the skin gives it a nice contrast of just plain and then intricate. And I think I am going to add that little gem hanging off like someone suggested. So to do that really quickly, I'm just going to make a new layer above the necklace layer. Say it was hanging like here. And since this part is in the light, I'll probably add a few highlights as I go down.
Would you add any like shadows like around the necklace, like on the skin?
Yeah, so the shadow wouldn't be apparent on this side. Maybe you'd have a little indication, but for the most part it would fall on the other side, because the way that the direction of the light is hitting this section here, the shadow would be casted from the object on the other side. So just like we did with the gem, actually I do not like, I thought I would like adding the highlights before I finish a gem, but I definitely do not. I would definitely finish this first and then I'll add the highlights in. So let's say it was just a simple gem. Maybe it has one of those topper things that connect it to the string. Like that. So now using the same technique that we did earlier, I'm going to make the bottom of this more saturated with the color. Then it's going to have a gradient that goes up. But for the most part, the top half is going to be more in that shadow, or that darker hue. And I'm going to grab that highlight color. And it's still that cool highlight that we're using. I'll place it right on the gem there. And then I'll give some highlights to the area surrounding the gem, kind of holding the string up as well. So you can see how that reads pretty flat as I zoom out. So then this is what we're going to do what Deandra was talking about, where I got to add a cast shadow to it. So I'm going to grab the skin shadow color that's under the neck, because like I keep reiterating this one, shadows don't add value, they're just a different color. And for the most part, a shadow color is going to stay pretty consistent within a piece. So I'm going to use that color and work it on the chest area as well. Now, kind of what we were trying to do with the larger gem, but since it's so pushed upward from the chest, you didn't really get as much. But here, you can really lay in that lighter red color. Actually, this is a bit too dark. Let me grab a lighter red. I'm going to have it fall right on the shadow. So that gives it that look of that translucency of the light passing through the actual gem and then falling on the chest. So it gives it a nice little effect. And you can definitely get carried away with jewelry, because once you do a little area, you can see like how much of an effect it'll add. And it adds that nice intricacy that maybe you didn't have before. And it's a great way to add interest in more complicated areas to your piece. So even with this, I might go ahead and add another string connecting to the side of the I don't want to call it a brooch, but I keep wanting to, but it's the bigger of the gems.
For fabric, do you prefer to use various texture brushes, or do you use a normal brush to like make your textures your own?
Depends. I'll say I try to stick with the circle brush as much as I can if I'm doing it where I'm taking my time on a piece. But if I'm trying to get it done quicker, I would say either the chalk brush or, let's see, what ones do I have in my selection here? I would definitely say the chalk brush would probably be my go-to, just because sometimes you can get a more organic feel from something like that as opposed to the circle brush where it's very hard and defined.
Are you gonna do anything with the background?
No, probably not.
No.
So now the area around the chest has actually become so defined that now my eye gravitates down here instead of the face. So I'd probably work on the face more. Like you can tell the chalk brush is giving it an unfinished look, and that's not exactly the intention, so I'd probably spend more time up there. But for the most part, I think we're going to cut the stream soon, just because we're on our last 10 minutes here, and I want to definitely share the news that we've been kind of holding on for the past couple months. Maybe I'll work just a tad more on the skin up here, on areas like the lips and areas that kind of need some attention. And then we'll go ahead and get to the announcement. Like I said, I mean, if you guys have any questions, it doesn't even have to be related to what we're working on. Definitely feel free to ask them.
Are you gonna add wrinkles to like your chest at all?
Yeah, I really wanted to add like sunspots and liver spots. Not to sound gross, but I think that adds that level of realism that I would be trying to hit with her. Or even like where the skin would break up in the cheeks. Sometimes you see, I want to draw it the best way I can, where the veins get kind of broken and you see them pretty apparent on the surface of the skin. And a lot of that is due to like sun damage, and I really want to give this character the impression that she's in the sun a lot and she's outside. She's definitely not the kind of woman that would be sitting indoors all day. And to really give things like wrinkles a really nice punch to them, have the contrast between a darker value and a lighter color or lighter value bump up right against each other. So you can see how this area right here, it really gives that impression of a ridge because of the way that the two values are working right on top of each other.
And I just wanted to add to like an earlier question about like Facebook fan pages and whatever else art stations. I think it's important for like you want to be easily found by people. That's like your goal.
Yes.
But at the same time, you want to have like a balance where like you're not on like every site just to spam like your art. You want to be there, like wherever you decide to like start uploading your stuff. Just like keep it up to date, be there, and like and don't be afraid to like market yourself.
I think a lot of artists have that problem where they're scared to showcase their stuff or they think it's going to get stolen.
Yeah. I mean, it might, and like there's always the possibility that it might come up, but it's not something that like you should be afraid of or like have it hold you back.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen like all that often, but it does happen. But there are like ways to like combat that sort of thing, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. And like if you don't even upload your stuff in the first place, like you already lose. So
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, no one finds you.
Mhm.
Because regardless, if you post your stuff up, there are going to be the good people that you want to see it and the people that might steal it. But if you don't post it up at all, then you're not even giving the good people a chance to look at your work.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, I could easily work on this for another hour or two just on the face area. The lips look, oh god, just pretty terrible at this moment. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can fix it a little bit before the stream will end. I'm actually really glad someone asked that question because of how much we talk about it outside of this stuff. I think it's because a lot of our friends are in this kind of limbo of like either trying to find work or getting themselves known. And a lot of times it comes down to either fear of like things getting stolen or a lot of it just comes down to being lazy because it is a lot of work to constantly be updating stuff and you have to be on it. You have to be consistent with updates. You don't want to update once a year. And like what DeAndre was saying, though, you don't want to also spam because when you spam, that actually turns people away. So having that nice medium between the two is what you want to look for.
I think a lot of people like underestimate like the power of like marketing too, and like how much of an influence it has. Like art is just like half of it. Like there's a whole other side to like
Oh yeah.
having a job as an artist.
The more that I become known or like I get to understand the industry more, I find out that it's a lot of who you know sometimes and it even over it's bigger than your actual skill level, which I know that scares a lot of people too, but it's very true. So if you can kind of take that and be like, okay, I understand that a lot of it is who I know and making myself known, that'll get you far. So definitely like go to conventions, meet artists, talk to them, email them for critiques, do whatever you can to get your presence out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you get to the point where you really are a talented, skilled artist, you will find work eventually. it becomes a lot easier if you know people and you really make your presence known in the community.
Yeah, connections.
hmm And even if it's something as simple as DeviantArt, I know people like to laugh it off, but a lot of artists have made their starts on DeviantArt and are actually doing pretty well nowadays. All right, so I'm going to cut this one off because, like I said, I could keep working on this for hours if I was able. So I'm going to go ahead and call this done. I hope you guys kind of learned something either from the jewelry or the fabric or the skin. I definitely think the jewelry came out the best in today's live stream, and that's something that it's really easy. And like I said, if you look at it close up, it's actually not that hard to do really. And like the area up here is really undefined. Oops. But from far away, if you're gonna be looking at it from this far away, that doesn't become noticeable, and it actually you save time by not taking the time to render it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and end this stream off. And let me see if I can open this for you guys. So the announcement that we're making, and it's something that you'll be able to check out on the site as soon as this is over, is our summer extravaganza announcement. And pretty much what this means is every week this summer, a new tutorial will be released every Thursday from a different artist. And that's a big deal for us at Concept Cookie because that means every week there's going to be new content for you guys to check out. And since it's from a different artist, you'll get a different perspective. You'll get their take on how they work, their workflows. And if you want to check out more about this announcement and the artists that are included, I have a little blurb about each of the 13 artists that will be with us. And hopefully it will get you guys excited about watching them. So, as always, thank you guys again for watching this live stream. We do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m., and that is Central Time. And if you're outside of the States, it's -5 GMT. And next week, we'll be doing something new, since this was the final one of our character live stream. So stay tuned, and I will let you guys know what we're doing next week. So bye, guys.
Bye.